Chapter 73. It was slow, and the slurry around them felt increasingly like tar. Occasionally it bubbled up around his feet, lapping and laughing and mocking as it threatened to suck him down into the soil and devour the last of his resolve, draining into his ears until even his mind was just so much oozing muck and grime.
Hurry up, ancient bro. We're almost there, and that means peace and relaxation while we wait for Ruslana and Zhao to just stumble on back.
Zambi continuously whirled around in front of him, dragging him forward when he fell forward, which was too often for his liking, even with Bones propping himself up against the older man's side.
Isn't that easy, I'm afraid. Soon you two'll need to go on without me. Tell my friends my apologies, and perhaps wait for yours to come back. As I'm sure they will.
Lying came easily to Leopold, for he had become skilled at it when he was very young, or perhaps Zambi was very gullible, or worse still, perhaps she actually believed, but then again, for them belief made sense. That sense was in the air. The sense of fate laughing, that sense of death, that sense of rebirth. Of distant dice rolling and their howl forever unsatisfied with his antics. Whether it was the ghosts of his family, those he had stepped over to achieve his desires, or some other force, Leopold had eventually stopped caring about his own coming demise, and yet, pulling himself to the proper posture a gentleman should keep even as his body ached, and half of it refused to respond besides the most cursory of motions, Leopold winced, ground his teeth, and nodded.
That's the spirit. Just keep on looking cool like that, and then even if the world ends right now, you'll look dashing while it do.
Of course she knew he had been lying, she wasn't dumb. It was just pleasant to think of her as naive, perhaps. Perhaps he cherished naivete because it was something he wanted to go back to cling to, and perhaps that was why he normally felt so frightened by everything, really.
Leopold. I think we've made it, though I'm quite worried for the fate of Ruslana and Zhao. I think I'd like to wait here for a little bit.
Bones had been slowly moving more and more cautiously behind them, the skeleton having finally turned his ancient back away to stare in the distance. Like a flash of green and burgundy, Zambi had bounded over his shoulders and stumbled next to him. She didn't say anything. Didn't need to, really.
I'll let the others know, then. It's been pleasant enough traveling with the both of you. I truly hope we meet again someday. Meeting people I do not immediately hate is cause enough to celebrate. You should try hating less people. You might surprise yourself.
Zambi couldn't resist, turning cheekily to grin at him, and he wished she hadn't. Not wanting to admit that he was crying to a small plant girl, who was also misty-eyed, while a skeleton stared into the distant horizon, Leopold tried to whirl on his feet, but while the rifle stock held well, the bayonet was not a proper cane.
I'm going ahead, then. Death isn't frightening. It's peaceful. Well.
He moved away as quickly as possible, hating himself for how slowly he hobbled, how he could hear their conversation even though it wasn't about him, hating himself for listening in. The hate burnt inside of him as always, but there was no energy to it, it no longer sustained him, and only exhaustion burnt among the embers there. Death isn't frightening? It's peaceful? What in every hell had he been babbling about? And then he had just left, just ran away like he always did. The bitterness spread from his heart, to his lungs, and perhaps to his eyes as well, and even the slurry around him seemed to take on the texture of burnt smoke and smog, and he kept falling, and every time it was a little harder to force himself to keep walking.
Sweet Leopold. You always overtax yourself. It's charming, truly, but also quite foolish. I think some might even call it dumb. Would you call it dumb, dear Mammon? Yeah. I'd call it dumb. Not that my vote counts, boss, but it really should.
And this was it, then. He had reduced himself to talking to his friends because they weren't here, because he couldn't talk to them in person, because he never talked to people in person because it hurt, because it scared him. Because, in the end, everyone stood alone. The mud, and it wasn't mud, it was some vile grey globe that seemed to be the same stuff as that thrice-damned second-rate monstrosity, clustered against his skin and bore into his nostrils. It smelled of nothing, and Leopold panicked, forcing himself from the muck, only to fall deeper into it. It coated his eyes, too, like some thick and biomechanical glue. Already had it been hard to see, now it was impossible. But he could continue to talk like this, at least.
Listen. I only overtax myself because I feel like, if I stop, everything around me will stop, too. I hate that feeling. You know it, you must know it. Sure do, boss. Since we're kind of parts of your head, now, I mean, I wouldn't actually know in person, because you really need to try talking this out, but,
Mr. Mammon smiled impertinently, stroking his goatee. Leopold hadn't realized it before, but as scraggly demon goatees went, it was pretty cool.
Just take it from me, or figmental me, at least. The world ends, and stuff breaks. Some days you can't even peddle stuff that's valuable. Some days, can't even give that away for free. Terrifying, hey. Mammon. You're confusing him when he's already quite easily confused.
Crimsolino squawked loudly, her flared wings cowing the Mammon figment into amused submission. Her feathers ruffled as she strode towards him imperiously, eyes lidded.
Sweet Leopold, listen. We're you, right now, at least. And what my own friend is trying to tell you, in his own butchered manner of speech, is that you need to tell us these things. Actually tell us them instead of just talking to yourself and lying in a pool of whatever this.
Crimsolino dismissively bent a talon into the goop, and even though it did not cling to her claw, her absolutely disgusted expression, Leopold nodded internally. It was quite grotesque, wasn't it?
But, I can't. I'm old. I'm tired. You too, you'll forget this, so what is the point? If time chips away at things, isn't it fine to just die?
Around him, the substance, and it did indeed seem biomechanical, and related to Dragunov, though he could faintly feel the great dragon's life pulsing in the ether, was growing thicker. It didn't consume life as quickly as the huge clump of it had, but even at his most depressed, Leopold couldn't help but think. It reminded him a little of the emanations he had corralled earlier. In fact, it felt almost exactly as they did, eager to please and easily shaped, but without much drive of their own. It didn't respond to his will, but
Whoa there, Chief. How do you think that makes me and Crim feel? Well, Crim's eternally young. Thank you, Mammon. But I'm probably ancient compared to you. Well, if you've died an awful lot, which I guess you have. But still. I'm old is an awful excuse for anything.
He wasn't wrong, of course, but Leopold was just looking for excuses, and didn't want to have to justify himself to himself, even if his self had decided to take on the apparition of his friends. Humph. Smiling despite himself, Leopold quickly shut his mouth out of fear of the nightmarish goop finding purchase.
Both of you should be lucky to have met me. Without my disciplinary actions, I doubt even the illusions of your presence would stand against me, as it were. I've been quite a good friend, haven't I?
His mumbling allowed just what he had feared, and the words sounded like a garbled mess. He could still breathe, of course. There was pocket of air around his nostrils. How nice. How fortunate. The goop tasted like hardened dough, clay, and strangely, cucumber soda. No, not the latter, but he was parched. Trying not to laugh at the absurdity of it all, he did, and was pulled deeper into the mire.
Listen. Please. I'm sorry. I'm sorry both of you. Are you?
She had asked, and this was on a summer's day. He felt it was a summer's day, at least. It was hard to remember when the seasons were all the same here. Temperate, or warm, or, were those the words? What did those words even mean? The dizziness felt like a fog around his skull. He tried to shake it off, and realized too late that it looked as if he was denying his crime. But he was sorry, he was really sorry. And the tears flowed freely from his face, even as stupid and embarrassing as it looked. Father wouldn't have been happy, that was certain. In front of him, on the dry and unpaved dirt road, lay the emaciated form of the moth, tiny strips cut from its tiny body. Of course she was asking him if he were sorry to the both of them, but it was truly only the moth he had apologized to. She was just always asking him for things, not that he truly minded.
I
just wanted power? How awful. It sounded horrible in his mind, so horrible he wanted to laugh for the second time. Mr. Mammon was the kind of demon who had probably traded in rare secrets at some point, the true names of ancient entities unknown to all and sundry, worth their weight in precious gems, or things more precious still. And somehow, forbidden and profane knowledge seemed so much less awful than what he had done that day. Wiping the tears from his eyes, even though for some reason not even his good hand would move, Leopold tried to inhale his snot, it got stuck in his nose.
I'm so sorry. I never wanted any of this. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I don't like apologizing.
How petulant it sounded, but she didn't seem to mind, patting him politely on the shoulder. Really, it wasn't fair, she went hunting for butterflies all the time, and wasn't that just as bad as this? It wasn't, though. He had done it for such awful reasons, and it had died so very slowly. And he had wished from the moment he had done it that he could take it back, and breathe its tiny little heart back to life, and the tears stopped. They had gotten sealed up, too. How strange.
It's not all right. Killing something is never all right. I really hate killing things. But I guess I do it a lot. I worry I'm going to kill you, sometimes.
Sniffing, even though theirs was nothing to breathe and his throat felt funny, Leopold scowled. That was better. No.
That's stupid. You're not going to kill me. I'm going to live forever. Or close enough. I don't care. One, both, maybe.
Even though she was still angry and sad about the moth, she laughed a little. He had tried to laugh, too, and managed a little one, though it still sounded kind of like sobbing. He was also having a lot of trouble seeing, everything felt grey.
I didn't mean literally. I meant figuratively. Like, I'll be the death of you. Like that.
Oh, that made sense enough as anything. No, it didn't at all. Knitting his eyebrows in concentration, Leopold tried to raise his finger in the air to gesture wildly at her, a smug smile on his lips and chastising words eager to follow, but he sank deeper into the muck. It was everywhere. There was no way to pull himself out of it now. And that was fine, he had made his peace, even if he truly were unhappy that he wouldn't be able to speak to his friends one last time. No. He wanted to speak to them many more times. He wanted to go on happy, pointless adventures and hear Crimsolino's aggravating cackling laughter, or steal something precious from Mr. Mammon and then sell it for a discount. He wanted to watch the two of them fight in that friendly manner that he had never quite managed to find with anyone he knew, the one that felt safe in the knowledge that your friend would never suddenly stop being a friend. He wanted to know that he had been a friend to them. Even a little, even at the end. He wanted to live.
Erg, really thick, isn't it? I don't get this place. It feels kind of like it's collapsing. But not really. Both. Sorry. Magic is for people with too much time on their hands.
Nodding, and surprised at how easily it came to him, Leopold stared down at the tiny moth, stretched over the dirt road with needles and pins. He had taken it apart by hand, and the little circle around it was amateur, no thing of power. No great demonic sigil. Just an ugly line of melted candluax and dried ichor. He wiped the freshly dried tear from his eyes.
I truly am sorry. I screwed so much up, do you know, I thought that was it. And then I thought nothing else would come of it, but... I suppose you've been haunting around here for quite some time, haven't you?
She clapped her hands together, looking really pleased in that brain-dead dreamy-eyed way of hers.
Yay! You can see me.
The muck had cracked around him, at least enough to free himself from it. Leopold wiped the dried sludge from his smoking jacket, mind racing. If it could be hardened by fire? Heat? No, neither. Something else.
Humph. I could always kind of see you. I just don't like acknowledging failures.
She frowned, sticking her grey arms into that grey jacket. How ugly and eaten away at the seams it was.
I'm not a failure. No, no. I meant myself. I've been running from one after another for so very long, now. And it means whenever I start fixing one, you know.
He shrugged, realizing how much the muck had clung to his face. Strangely, it hadn't actually felt as if he were suffocating, either. Perhaps some property of the stuff. How pleasant, really, a way of killing without actually feeling anything, minus the whole part where you died.
MMNHMN. That's why it's important for you to face things, have a new start. Do you think you can?
They shared a glance forward. Had he made it so close to district? On his own, with none to help him?
Yes. Maybe I'll be the cool old fellow whose knowledge of useless dead languages saves the day somehow. I doubt it, but, at the end of the day, I don't mind playing second fiddle to Mr. Mammon, or Crimsolino. They're wonderful people. Creatures, I should say.
He tapped at the air where his cane was supposed to be, and had only a moment to realize that it wasn't there before falling back into the thankfully hardened muck. She knelt down, the same blank look on her blank face. Well, it wasn't entirely blank. She had always emoted very mutedly, for fear of seeming too enthusiastic, perhaps.
Well, that's me, then. I made a pact with someone to ride along until I got a chance to help you. You'll be on your own from here.
How embarrassing it was, her fingers were as rough as he remembered, but still young, and he had grown so old and calloused. Still. His eyes knit.
So, it was you? I suppose I should begrudge you for bringing me back from the edge so many times just to let me die again over some damn fool grudge. No grudge. The opposite, really. I wanted you to eventually have a life where you could feel like this. Instead of staying the same, inflexible.
Her laughter was unpleasant in the best way, and he snickered at it while fumbling for something in his coat that wasn't there, maybe a pen, or a flower. His eyebrows knit, and he wanted to ask what her name had actually been, but of course, she was just a moth, so by the time he had looked back up. Leopold inhaled deeply. The rain above had stopped, to be released by a truly hellish howl. Gaps in the sky were sucking in most everything small around him, bits of grass, chunks of dried muck. Awful, truly. Rushing as quickly as he could, but finding it humorous rather than hateful, Leopold managed to throw the huge doors open himself, or rather, Binky must have seen him coming and opened them, but was polite enough to act impressed as Leopold tripped forward, struggled for breath and struggled hiding his embarrassment, and then hollered.
I've returned.
Instantly he was swarmed by a mob of people and demi-people. That powerful witch wasn't amongst them, suspiciously enough. Nor her tutor/mentor/friend. Unimportant. He had only cast around for whom he was looking for a few moments before plumes of gold and red fell about his shoulders and claws accidentally sank into his face. Squawking in embarrassment, Crimsolino pulled back, but it was only a shallow cut and the pain was life-affirming. He had always hated how that sounded, but he was alive. He was still alive. Laughing and not caring that Paul, who had wandered over, sipping from the last of the strategic soda reserve, was clearly not digging how crazy that laughter was.
So sorry, it's terribly hard to fly as worlds crumble around you. Leopold. I'd quite imagined you had ran off. And it looks like my imagination was quite wrong. What a wonderful treat. Humph. I thought about it, but dying alone when I can die with people I'm neutral towards seems selfish and less amusing. Where is Mammon? I've a mind to sell half my soul for a truly fantastic set of metal-rimmed playing cards and a truly passable cane. You rang? Sorry, souls are awful currency. Didn't we discuss this? Where do you get your ideas about demons, boss, really?
Hopping over Paul, who was now so out of this, quietly heading back down the bunker to play video games with the newcomer and her weird furless poodle cat, Mr. Mammon chortled up at him, though his golden eyes were gleaming with a cautious light.
Good to stay this time. Honestly, think I am. Oh. The rescue squadron of the rescue squadron will be here shortly. I just arrived here first because they're nobility of the finest caliber, even if there's not a drop of noble blood between any of them. Possibly that skeleton, he strikes me as quite refined.
Binky cheered very quietly, but very enthusiastically, vast green hands raised towards the heavens. He had a very tiny spear that had been used to skewer a chunk of canned pineapple, and the sight. It was silly and accidental and a pointless personal moment, and Leopold treasured it.
Yay! Binky knew they'd make it. Now the world doesn't have to end.
Mr. Mammon produced a deck of fine, metal-rimmed playing cards from under his hat. HMRN. He truly was a merchant's merchant.
Sorry, Binky. World's still ending, as far as I can tell. Never too late to try, but why not play cards with us instead? You can move crims, since...
Mammon's eyes shot from Crimsolino's talons to the cards. Metal-lined as they were. The Duchess gave a horrific, high-noted, and angry trill, followed by a sharp click of her tongue.
Absolute rubbish, dear Mammon. Gentle Binky should be able to play for himself, and I'll just... shuffle the cards with my wings, I suppose? Well, it'll be tricky, but that'll be part of the fun. Won't it, Leopold? I think, I'll be content to watch the three of you try. If you don't mind.
And he had almost forgotten the end of the world howling above them and below them and issuing its deathly siren song. Binky shook his head, a tiny, incredibly sad smile on his gigantic face.
Sorry. Gotta go talk to Miss Tatty. She really wants to be friends, and she's friends with Boleslava, so I want to be friends with her, too. I really wished she had stayed here. We'll play cards next life.
With a tiny wave from a huge hand, Binky slid down the bunker, and Leopold's mind raced.
Goodness, I'd forgotten. I think I know how to end this. The world doesn't have to end, and we can all survive, at least. Even if we end up parting ways.
The howling vacuum above was blowing his hair in every direction, lending no credence to his wild-eyed stare, but Leopold didn't mind. Mr. Mammon shrugged, smiled, and folded his arms against each other.
Sounds pretty unlikely, but hey, we've broken into vaults, temples, and subway systems. What's the worst that could happen? Crim.
But Crimsolino was simply staring into the sky, expression unreadable.
I should.
Her eyes shut, and the Duchess sighed, almost intangibly.
I should like nothing more than to help the both of you. No matter the cost, I would see a day where the two of thee might live pleasant lives. Thigh. Crim. What's with the old manristics? Doesn't sound like you at all, unless you're gonna swear like a real lady at the end.
Under her beak, the harpy's teeth ground against one another, and she whirled her long neck to face the bemused, smirking merchant.
Damn Natal, Mammon. I don't want either of you to die, and I'm feeling very, I don't rightly know at all how I feel, but I don't like it.
Shortly thereafter, Crimsolino did indeed swear like a lady, and even though it was something he'd never say out loud.
Mammon is quite right. False modesty, a kindly demeanor, a gentle tongue. 3 things that I do not think of, when I think of thee.
Leopold stifled a grin, even as Crimsolino glowered at him.
Humph. Well, perhaps I shall just avoid helping your horrible inevitable failure of a plan, though, we might as well hear it. Go on, then, if you must. Yeah, please. I'd like that a lot. But if we could make it the Cliff Notes version, that'd be fantastic. I've been speed reading a lot of stuff in the dark library, and it really takes a toll on your psyche, Eep. Sorry if I startled you.
Lorelei had appeared out of the howling ether besides Mr. Mammon, whom had been leaning against a wall and trying to look cool, perhaps in an attempt to psyche himself up. The purple demon's yell wasn't exactly dignified, but Crimsolino's gentle wing against his shoulder seemed to calm him down quickly enough.
Whoa, Lorelei. Please don't scare us like that. Me, really. These 2 are tough as nails. Also, the dark library is still up, neat, I thought they'd renovated it for development space.
Lorelei's circular braid had come undone, and her hair, naturally frizzy and messy as it was hanging in every direction. Circles under her eyes had grown and expanded, but she was practically beaming from ear to ear.
Rumors and lies. Also, welcome back, Leo.
Bowing his head stiffly, Leopold managed a smile, and was surprised how pleasant it felt.
Thank you kindly. The journey was pleasant as any through apocalyptic hell without my wonderful friends might be. So, my plan. I'm fairly certain that the decay of the world is due to the fact that, without our presence and the dragons, the island has little to hold itself together.
Nobody said anything. Eventually, Lorelei coughed politely.
I'm sorry, but we, kind of already knew that, I think most of us were guessing something like that. Well, yes, of course.
Snapped Leopold, but thankfully his friends were quite used to it, and Lorelei was unfazed.
But I think when I tried to steal Dragunov's power, I threw off the balance of this reality, or something. It's hard to say exactly, but it's entered some kind of system where it systematically destroys itself only to rebuild anew. Perhaps because of my interference? I cannot say.
Lorelei frowned, looking as if she disagreed, or at least wasn't entirely certain. Crimsolino whistled, a peculiar sound from in between her gilded beak, and coiled around the shoulders of the young witch. Leopold was mildly annoyed that she took extra care not to spear her, but also just a little happy, all the same.
Sweetest Leopold. Does that truly help us at all? I don't think you can give Dragunov his power back. I shall never understand the emphasis of folk on such things.
Her admonishing tongue didn't bother him at all. Leopold's hand felt light against his neck as he spoke feverishly.
No, that's not it at all. I mean to say.
What if the world didn't have to end? What if nobody had to feel sorrow at all, and things could continue as they once were? As they have always been. As always they shall be. The wind howled, and the sky howled, and drowned out what he had said, but the last die had been cast, as crackling beams of anti-light stole vision from the sky wherever they struck. Chapter end.